Real happy to be joined by my next guest on the Sports Card Shop guest line. She is, a women's sports historian, former athlete in her own right, in the process of writing a book. We'll talk about that amongst other things. But happy to have her as part of the Sports Card Nation podcast. Miss Cindy Dick, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, John. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Now I mentioned, you're an athlete yourself. You played sports. Um, uh, you know, did that would that get you like? Was that the kind of what piqued your interest in what you do, being an athlete yourself, or was it even before that? Would you say?
I mean, it definitely helped. I've always had a love of pictures, though, and I think it was the combination of both. And so when I started finding women's cards, which is totally by accident, it just clicked, and it was this aha moment, and it was like magic, and it's led me down this wonderful hole of history for women's sports that I didn't even know about. So yes, being an athlete definitely helped.
Yep. Do you remember? You talked about like the first time you realized like trading cards existed, especially on the women's side of things. Do you remember that?
Of
Can you
course,
share
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Yeah. Can you share that
Um,
moment for you?
I was yard sailing in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and this little kid, this guy, this little boy, had this table full of cards, and he points out a Manot Rion card, and he's like, there's a woman there, and this was in the early 1990s, and it just really was intriguing. I wasn't an ice hockey player at all. I didn't even figure skate or anything, but there was something so magical about that. And then I started looking for other cards. And this is before eBay was really a thing. So I would go to card stores and card shows, and I would ask for women's cards. And they'd often kind of like look at me funny and sometimes offer me cheerleaders and coaches' wives and just obscure things. But I slowly built a collection, and I slowly learned where the women's cards were. And then one day I came upon a vintage card. And that one sent like electricity through my body. It was such a neat experience. And I like to say, like, I didn't know, I knew I was onto something, but I didn't know what. And that was, I think it was 1932 Olympic athlete, but I really didn't even know who she was. Anyways, and so slowly I started to define this niche that I'm in now, which is like vintage women's cards.
Yeah, and I don't have to tell you this, and I think most people who are familiar with the hobby, whether it's fair or not, the fact is that they weren't produced in the same vein as their male counterparts. We've seen strides made in that, especially in recent years. And like you said, even in those when you first started collecting, even going to shops or shows and asking for these, people just didn't have them. And now I can attest from the shows I either set up at myself as a dealer, or myself with the inventory I carry, or even seeing what other my dealer counterparts. It is more prevalent now, and I'm sure social media has been a big boost to that. Um, do you give credit to social media for that, or you just think more people are starting, the light bulbs are kind
Mm.
of turning on, and people are realizing like, a female athlete are athletes. They're just female. Like we need to stop like kind of compartmentalizing, and that sort of thing. You think there's some of those light bulbs are kind of turning on, or what do you attribute it to?
Well, I think it's a slow burn light bulb. I mean, there's definitely people that love women's sports, and they're slowly understanding that they're making cards of them now more so that are easier to find. I still, when I talk to people about my collection, and these could be professionals in the women's sports field, be them coaches or advocates, historians, whatever it may be, they still don't know that there's cards of women, contemporary or vintage. And that still astounds me. I mean, there's definitely more in the card world. Of course, we're going to see more, but in the kind of, if you will, the general public, the non-hobby people, it's a new thing that they're I'm speaking very generally here, but that they're learning about. And it's interesting to educate people that way because they're very fascinated about, especially the vintage cards.
Yeah, and I'm a vintage guy, so I love them, and I'm not just it just happens to be one of the cards more prevalent on my desk here, so I'll share it. Um, it's actually one of the 1880, the long cut tobacco cards, and this is an unnamed actress. And what's interesting about this card, Cindy, is this is actually from Jefferson Burdick's
Oh, wow.
collection,
Wow.
and so it's from the Met.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's the back, and he was famous for
Yeah.
gluing his cards into his scrapbooks, and you can't see, you won't be able to see it on with the glare and just with this camera. Don't do it. Just, there's the Met sticker that's
Uh-huh.
actually, or stamp, I should say, not sticker, on the back, and so not an athlete per se. This is an actress, but you know, it's still nice to see. Although there should be more. Um, it's nice to know that even from the early 1800s,
Hmm.
we still had a young female kid could have a role model maybe to look at. Although these are tobacco cards, so hopefully they're not smoking to get those. They were just acquired, maybe handed down some other way.
Yeah.
Is there an athlete, a female athlete that stands out to you in terms of that doesn't have any cards and should like really? You feel like she's she was a tremendous athlete, but like for some reason no one made a card and like really you know dropped the ball there, if you will.
Yeah, and her name just escaped me, but it's the first African American. It will come back to me, but the first African American woman that earned a gold medal in the Olympics
Okay.
in 1948,
Yeah.
and she was in high jump, and she didn't get her first card until 48 years later in 1996.
Wow.
And so, yeah, sorry for the name escaping me, but it will come back. But yeah, she deserves a card for sure.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's too bad that it wasn't made sooner rather than 48 years after the fact. But you know, uh, better late than never, I guess. And I had an author on, and she wrote a book about Tony Stone, which is
Hmm.
the first female professional baseball player who played with the likes of Hank Aaron and Willie
Hmm.
Mays, and
Yeah.
um, held her own and but faced a lot of uphill battles. Not only as being a female athlete playing a male dominated sport, but being African
Yeah.
American on top of that. It's an inspirational story. It's a children's book, but I read it and I knew about Tony Stone prior to the book. But even though the book was a children's book, highly illustrated, I still learned a lot from getting to
Hmm.
read it.
Hmm.
And just a tremendous lady who, even after her baseball career was over, became a coach and was invited to the Hall of Fame for
Wow.
appearances. Has a park named after her and that sort of thing.
That's
But a
great.
lot of the things, Cindy, happened sort of like after her career, or a few things
Yeah.
even after
Yeah.
she had passed away. It would have been nice to see some of that stuff happen sooner and
Yeah.
earlier. I don't know. That one of the reasons I asked you that question was because, to my knowledge, I do not believe Tony Stone has a playing day card, and
I've
I'm not
never
even
seen
sure.
one.
Now I'm going to have to check this. I don't even know if she has even an aftermarket
She
card,
does.
if you
She,
will.
she
Okay.
does. It was produced by the Ted Williams Card Company, I think,
Okay.
in
Yep. Yep.
'96. But
Yep. I
Alice
remember.
Coachman, Alice Coachman is who I was thinking of, and I apologize
Okay.
for
There you
not
go. Yep.
for slipping her
So,
name.
yep. So Alice Coachman, Tony Stone,
Yep.
someone I brought, to my list. Would have been nice to see them have cards, during their active sports and athletic days, that they can enjoy, and but I guess better late than never, right? And it helps.
Yeah.
You know, the one thing I loved about the new Tony Stone book was, it's made for kids, so a lot of young boys and girls are going
Hmm.
to read that book and learn about who Tony Stone was. And for girl, it transcends sports because you know, I- it anyone reading that, she was her own parents didn't want her to play baseball. She kind of, I don't want to say disobeyed, but she kind of went against their wishes and was persistent. Coaches didn't want to coach her. Other players didn't want her to play, but she didn't take no for an answer. And I think there's more of a life lesson than even just the sports one there
Hmm.
with Tony Stone, and probably in a lot of these female athletes' cases is pursue your dreams, right? Whatever they may be. If it's to be a female baseball player or a female surgeon or whatever those aspirations are, don't let people tell you you can't or no, and continue to chase your dreams. And I think that's important on both sides of male or female, but I think even more so on the female side of things. I know you tend to collect. I've heard you say before, like those active playing day cards of those female athletes. Kind of talk to your collection. How vast is it?
Okay.
How many cards do you have? Do you like? Do you keep a list like, hey, I still need to acquire this? Do you sort of have like targets that you go for, or is it one of those things where, and there's nothing wrong with either answer, where like I just go in and see what's available, and I don't have that, I want that, or I like that, and it's affordable, and I can acquire it. Like, what's your approach to your own personal collection?
All right, you give me a lot to unpack here. So, but it's fun to geek out on this. So I've
Yeah,
been collecting since the early 90s, so
yeah,
30-ish years. Um, like I said, I was able to kind of, due to resources, my time, my money, um, focus on a pre-1972 timeframe. So anything as far back as I could find it. And roughly around the time they were competing. So I'll make a few exceptions on that. I mean, it doesn't have to be to the year, but like within the decade. And because that would influence or empower or um, just inspire the people that could see them during that day. And the saying of if you can see it, you can be it holds true in time and memoriam. So as far back as I could find them, pre-1972, and that was because of Title IX in the US, which I think had a global impact on women's sports, and then around the time that they were competing, and then original. So that's my parameters. As I've started on this journey of writing a book, there's certain patterns that come up in this collection. So I own a little bit over 2,000, and I have a database of over 3,000, including those 2,000. And I know there's more. This is the nice mystery of this hobby, is that I'm always finding something I haven't seen. It's just finding something now is fewer and farther between to find
yeah,
that unique, gem. So what I've seen is in patterns is there's a particular 2 decades that there's a peak. And so if you look at it in a graph, it starts like 1887. Was the first competitive athlete, which is Hattie Stewart that I have found, and she was a female boxer. And then it goes up into the 1920s, 1930s, 36, boom, falls. And then it
yeah,
barely, catches back up into 1972. So the peak was 32, 36 Olympic period. And then there's patterns with like what countries produce the most, and that's Germany. And then there's patterns of what sport was represented the most. And surprisingly, it's track and field. So again, this isn't an exclusive collection where I have everything, or I don't know everything, but of a pretty good sampling. It's just interesting. And so as far as like looking today, yes, there is a hit list that I search certain words. And I also just scroll and scroll through, like auction sites. And I don't have as much luck going in person, because especially shows, because people are going to sell what they think is going to sell. And this is
yeah,
such an obscure thing that it's not something, they haven't brought much of this in 30 years. And so I spent a lot of foot time talking to people, and then occasionally I do find something, but it's mostly online now. And so the online world has definitely brought the world
Yeah.
to me, because most of these are printed in other countries. The US is like the fourth largest in the collection, behind Germany and the UK and Sweden, surprisingly.
You mentioned Germany kind of leading
Hmm.
the way in women athletes production cards. I
Hmm.
mean, what do you attest that to? Just their strong competition during that time period, especially, or something else, or a combination of things.
Well, World War One decimated
Yeah,
their population.
yeah,
And so they had to build back their population. And they had the same feeling that a lot of countries did, that for a good part of the 19th century, 20th century, excuse me, that no, 19th century, that sports would hurt the woman's ability for being a mother, for reproduction, etc.
mhm,
But to rebuild this, they slowly have adopted this feeling that, or thought that, strong women made strong babies. And so sport was, and fitness was incorporated. And they also had something called the turn-in system, which was like large group gymnastics, but not like Simone Biles gymnastics. We're talking movement, basically. And it was
mhm.
not always competitive, but they had the same elements that track and field had. So they're competing for people to participate, and as are the track and field clubs. And eventually, as the Olympics, they could participate in the Olympics again because they were banned after the war. It became a show of national pride, and so women were encouraged to participate in sport, and particularly track and field. And that's why we see a lot of German track and field cards, but not all of German athletes. There's a wide variety and a lot of international athletes that are represented.
And I guess on the other side of that coin, so to speak, you mentioned like the U.S. kind of finishing fourth in terms of production. You think that's just a microcosm of society in the nation at the time, with some women's suffrage and women's rights and that sort of thing, and women's role, or how their role was perceived to be, like, be a stay-at-home mom and take care of the kids while dad works, and obviously we know that's not how it is today, and nor
Hmm.
should it have to be. But do you think that's maybe the reason why we sort of trailed in terms of production, with depicting athletes and women on trading cards during this time period?
I mean, likely there was really strong organized movements to keep women out of competitive sports, and kind of shockingly, it was organized by women. And so a lot of physical education teachers, a lot of just community activists, they didn't want to see women compete in sports. They didn't want to see them particularly go to the Olympics. And this is the early part of the 20th century. And so it
Y-
was, if it wasn't for the AAU, we
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have much in the way of women's sports. And I think this is why, women's sports equity has lagged behind so much over the decades, because it had this really just fervent opposition against not only participation, but competition, getting individual attention. They thought it was going to fall into the pitfalls that, male sports were in at that point, corruption and betting and all of these things that were not feminine in those days. And so, yeah, I mean, the cards definitely reflect that. You see more cards in the socially acceptable sports like golf, ice skating, figure skating, tennis, and swimming, versus things like track and field. I mean, the fact that
Yeah.
Althea Gibson, and we're talking 1950s, um, she has zero that I know of American cards. She has few
So
cards I know of, and they come out of the UK and Germany, but zero American cards.
yeah, and that's hearing that too. I didn't know that until hearing you say that. There's my first reaction, right, is kind of sad. Here's an American hero,
Hmm.
and you have to go to another country's production to see them represented. So it's
Yeah.
another country producing a card of an American hero just that doesn't sound right, right?
Yeah,
And
there's more cards of
there
her today.
shouldn't be.
Yeah, there's more cards of
Yeah,
her today, excuse me, than were printed then. And it
yeah, but
speaks
you,
to, yeah, this speaks to the racist times.
yeah, yeah, which is unfortunate, and it's too bad that that was the case. Growing up as a younger lady, did you collect cards in general, like just like baseball cards? And who was like the first female, if athlete that you looked up
Mhm.
to or inspired you as you became an athlete in your own right?
I did have baseball cards. I remember them with my friends. I remember the gum, the smell, the texture of the cards. I had a shoebox worth of baseball
Yeah,
cards. And then I sold them sadly. But the only card I can remember out of the whole slot, which again, this would have been early 70s, was I had a Hank Aaron card, and that one was special to me. Sad to sell it, but kids, just pass toys on.
yeah,
And my first athlete that really inspired me was hearing about Babe Diedrichson. And I also ran track, and I ended up doing hurdles and high jump and, two of her three Olympic sports. And yeah, I didn't realize how arrogant she was at the time, but and lack of sports womanship, if you will. But I did later, and I understood a little bit about what she went through. But yeah, she was definitely my first inspiration. And I chased her card for a long time, the Gowdy Sports King card, and finally was able to acquire it. Um, but she has several cards, and which is fun. But that one's the one that's most well known.
yeah. And like you said, kind of a little conceited, but listen, when you're that kind of athlete, right, sometimes that does come with the territory, and you can't argue with the accolades and their prowess. So there's worse people you
Yeah.
could have looked up to. But when we're seeing, you talked about that being like a big card that you acquired. Is there a card? I know we talked a little bit before we went live recording, and
Hmm.
is there a card that's kind of at the top of your want list that for whatever reasons giving you grief in terms of acquisition?
She has one in, I think it's called Bravo Builder, which is a German phrase. It's oftentimes in a booklet, where they was pasted in a booklet, and sometimes you see them loose. There's a lot of them loose, but I've only seen hers come up for auction once, and I missed it. And then there is an Althea Gibson card from. It's not really a card. It's more of but people consider it a card. It's a Cadet Suites. It's the transferables, and because people probably stuck it on a window or something, because it's reversed, it's going to be incredibly hard to find. And there's a few others, but yeah, this jumped to my mind.
Do now with your collection, do you like, will you acquire duplicates, or once you have something, unless you get maybe a better condition one, do you tend to try to just get one, or not necessarily?
I'm more of a get one. It would have to be pretty substantially better, and again within a price range I would want to pay, or a graded card if mine's raw. That's the only time I would ever get two. I don't really focus on selling or reselling. It's not my shtick. I am more of a collector, and definitely focusing my resources on this particular, like, now pre 1940 phase, because that's where I ended up focusing my book. I figured if I go all the way up to 1972, I will never finish this thing because there is so much history there. And so, I just picked a time that was like most interesting to me, which was the 20s and 30s. And so I shut it off at 1940s. So those are
Understand.
the ones I'm really looking at more than anything, is the pre 1940s cards.
Now, are you good? Like, I know you said you don't necessarily go to a ton of shows, but if and when you do, and you're looking, at acquiring to add or fill some spots and holes in your collection, do you know, like in your mind, like, I don't have that, I do have that, or do you have so much now that you do have to refer to like kind of like a spreadsheet or what have you, or are you so good where you can just look and like, I don't own that yet?
It's a little bit of both. I have a pretty good, I won't say I have a photographic memory, but I can see, if I haven't seen something before, it jumps right out. It's the ones that, like a lot of these companies, they would use the same image.
Yep.
Photography was pretty rare back then, and so some would reuse images, and so it'll be a different back, and then I have to like check the sheet, like, is that the one I have?
Yep.
um, but yeah, I do have a database. It has been very helpful. I don't like to buy the same card twice. To me, that's a grand waste of money, and give somebody else the,
Yep.
opportunity to enjoy the hobby.
Yeah. Have you found, you're sort of at the forefront of, women, especially on the vintage side.
Hmm.
Have you found like people are using you as a resource? And when I say using you, I mean in a good way, not in
Yeah.
the negative connotation, but like, acquiescing to your knowledge and the research that you're doing. Like, hey, this is my favorite athlete. I know about this card, but is there anything else that, hey, that I don't know of that maybe I should? Are you getting that sort of community kind of aspect to women athletes and collecting of them?
Somewhat. One story that jumps out is I've been working with a woman who is a Canadian female sport historian who was in academia and is now retired. And she was writing something about Annette Kellerman, who was a swimmer. And she asked me about, like, what do I have in her cards, and not so much what I know about her, because she's a historian too, but sometimes you see images that you don't see in the public. And then she also looked at some of my other writings, and particularly around the Olympians. And she's like, wow, there's images in there in these cards that I have never seen before. And I think that really speaks volumes about the importance of these cards, to have that treasure of a pictorial history that hasn't been seen before. And if I can segue here, I also, what I love about that is that they don't have this, um, huge emphasis on graphics that the cards do today, where it's almost the
Yeah,
graphics overpower the athlete. And these vintage ones, it's all about the athlete. I mean, they're pretty simple on the graphics, if anything at all, and so they just, what they capture and what they decided to put into print, I think is really just a great way to look at history.
yeah, and I agree. I agree. There's something that, like, I do some modern stuff, as a dealer that sets up, but that's why I lean vintage is because it was more about the person depicted on the card rather than the card
Yeah.
itself. And you see these
Yeah.
cards, and you can see like where whoever owned the card before, you know, wrote a new team. Maybe they got traded or signed by a new team, and they kind of updated the card, or new position, or and it was about, like you said, it was about the athlete depicted on the card. And
Hmm.
now and I guess, it's modern times, and with new technologies, and now it's more about the design rather than the player, or at
Yeah.
least more about the design than ever before. And there's something to be said about that vintage card, where it was that name and that player that was on the card rather than the design, because they were limited in what they could do design wise. So
Right.
it
Yeah.
had to be about the player or the athlete depicted on the card. So that's a great point, and it's a great reason too, right? To really appreciate.
Hmm.
They weren't trying to really impress anyone with design. They were just trying to make sure they got, athletes and people they wanted represented in these sets. And like you said, here in the states, we probably kind of dropped the ball on our female side of the house, on the athletic side, and other countries maybe did a better job than that. But today it's a little bit different. I know you don't necessarily do modern cards. I know I've heard you say from time to time you open some. I know you get to some shows.
Yeah.
I spoke again a little bit before we kind of went live. I can attest to, we're seeing more female collectors, which is awesome. I'm seeing a lot more female dealers on that side of the table, where it used to be, just wives of male dealers. Now we're seeing females in their own right, being entrepreneurial and setting up at shows. We're seeing females, working in the corporate space on the hobby side. So on all levels, we're seeing more. There's obviously always room for more improvements in those areas. Uh, can you attest to that? Is that something you're noticing? Do we need to still, can it be better, or can some of these companies even do more stuff to keep that trend going at a better trajectory even?
I mean, there's always always room for improvement. Right
Yeah,
now, they seem to be focusing a lot on the team sports, and there's not a lot on the individual sports as well. Uh, it's kind of a loaded question, and I'm not really sure how to answer it because there's women in the hobby, but they're not necessarily collecting women's sports.
yeah,
And so and men collect women's sports, and then there's the
yeah,
collectors that collect for the love of the sport and the love of the card, and then there's some that's purely in it for the money. And
yeah,
so that second group, I don't really connect with, because I've
yeah,
never been in it for the money. It's
yeah,
it's if anything, it costs me a lot, but I've just never been in it for the money. And so I have a hard time sometimes seeing women's cards commercialized so much, and yet at the same time, that high dollar price, for some reason, that gives it validity. That means it's
yeah,
important. You have the Serena Williams cards and the Mia Hamm card, and that now are in six figures, and it's crazy, but it gives it like a piece of legitimacy that it didn't have before. And it's just because of the dollar signs. And yet it's the same card that some kid picked out of their SI for Kids magazine of Mia Hamm and stuffed it in a shoebox. And,
yeah,
it's like, does this make it more important or not? I still go into, excuse me, local stores sometimes. I did a rare thing in that I sent my cards to PSA, but only because they did a local drop off. And so after I met them in the store, I asked the person behind the counter, who was a woman, if they had any women's cards at all. Any? None. None. Which was
yeah,
really surprising because usually they will have the WNBA cards.
yeah.
Now we have ice hockey and some others, but
There's
I
a
was really
I don't there's a
surprised.
we're getting a female baseball professional baseball league
Hmm. Hmm.
now, and as a baseball guy who coached, in little league, and then I wound up coaching varsity high school baseball. In little league, I got to coach some young ladies who were just as good as the boys I had on the team. And then what happens, as you probably well know, is then you have to play. If you're a girl, you have to go and play softball, whether you liked it or not. There wasn't any baseball leagues at a certain. You were aged out, and then you became,
Hmm.
you went over to softball side, and now it's nice to see, a professional. It would have been nice sooner, or even not even professional, but uh, you know, uh, regular, just even recreational or high school, even baseball teams for a girl that says, "Hey, I want to just continue playing baseball. I've played since I'm 5 years old, and it's what I know how to do. I don't need a bigger ball. I like the bats I use and all that. But it's nice to see that. I guess better late than never. Would have been nice to see it sooner. But we're seeing strides there. We're seeing I strides and even pay scale. Right, a lot of these leagues. I guess we'll use the poster child for with the WNBA now. The salaries are still. I'm not comparing them to the NBA, but they're closer to that than they were when it first came onto the scene, and we're starting to see more female athletes and endorsements and doing commercials and representing products and brands, and so there's a ways to go, but I think we're seeing some strides. Again, maybe later than it should have happened, but I rather it happen than not happen. You're kind of, I know I threw a lot at you there on different kind of levels
Yeah.
with branding and the athletes themselves and leagues themselves, but kind of your thoughts on where like
Hmm.
women's sports is in general, even outside the card aspect
Hmm.
of it.
Going to your point about baseball, I was never a softball player, but I think I would caution them. Yeah, it's great, it strides, it's nice, but if they could take any lessons from the Silver Bullets team from the '90s, who they played against men, but they had this great novelty year, and people came out and then they folded shortly after that because they lost the novelty. And in baseball, you don't have a pipeline like hockey, ice
Yeah.
hockey, which I think is going to be the next big women's sport. They have a pipeline. They have college teams that play. It's in the Olympics. There's interest. People see it. And not that baseball is foreign by any means, but you really don't have a pipeline. And softball and baseball skill level have their own, unique things to them. And so this will be interesting to see how that plays out. It is a competitive market, of course, in sports and TV, and getting competitive, getting eyeballs and seat price tickets. And I think that's one of the interesting things with the argument with the WNBA is we want the players to get paid more so they don't have to play overseas, and just wear out their bodies faster, but just to get paid more, that's a livable wage. Um, and at the same time, a lot of people don't want to pay higher prices in the tickets. So if you compare a WNBA game ticket to an NBA game ticket, they're vastly different. And I think that in the WNBA, it's taken decades to, in its maturation process of getting more fans, because you need to be able to get more people in the seats. So, yeah, I would like to see them paid more, but do I want to pay, a $60 to $80 ticket for an upper deck seat? No, probably not. And so it kind of goes both ways. It's like we want to see the development and the improvement, and yet at the same time not always pay more, even though of course there's other streams of revenue, and women's soccer showed that with demanding equal pay to the men's team, even though they might not get as many people in the stands, but there are other sources of revenue as well.
Yeah, great point. And but it's I'm for fair compensation. So
Mm-hmm.
whatever that you make a great point. Like where's the tipping point, right? Where if you charge that much, maybe someone's not going to come out, and now you don't sell that ticket, and that obviously affects salaries. And so I guess it's we got to look at the as an overall, but definitely better than when I at certain points, they talked about the WNBA kind of folding and going away. So it's survived and it thrives, and now we're I guess we're seeing Caitlin Clark, and she's not the only one, but she's really sort of burst onto the scene after a great college
Mm-hmm.
career, and really, you know, really a very humble and modest athlete. Doesn't just really tries to make it more about the sport she plays than about her. But people love her. Is this is there's too much, or do you think this is a good thing? I know she's not necessarily looking for the spotlight. It's found her, like it or not. Do you think the attention she's getting is like a double-edged sword, where it can be good and bad because maybe it's too much on one person, and not just the all the athletes in general, or not necessarily?
I look at it like social media. Like we can absorb one or two or three times of social media, and you get more than that. And there's a lot more out there, and it's like too much. I can't do it. I only like a few things. And with stars, you need a star. Michael Jordan was the star for a long time. Larry Bird was the star, and the spotlight. There was other stars, of course, but sometimes you just need that one person to capture the country's attention or the world's attention. I remember asking my mom recently, she's 82 years old, and they said, "Mom, do you know who Caitlin Clark is?" And she's like, "Of course I know who Caitlin Clark is." She's not a sports person, but
Yeah.
she has become a household name. And so you get that excitement of this like phenom now in women's basketball, and people will want to come out and see her, and then they get exposed to other people, and then they can start like, "Oh, I really like this other player, she's fantastic, I relate to her," for whatever reason. And so she's kind of that gateway into exposing more people to a particular sport. So I don't have a problem with it at all, as long as the other equally talented athletes also get some limelight as well.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing I hate to see is too, I think sometimes some of the athletes in the league in the WNBA. I think they, and it's not Caitlin's fault. I mean, she's declined. Like she could have entered the 3-point contest, and she
Hmm.
declined that invitation, and just wants to work on her game and get ready for the next season. So she's not like the, she's not going out and seeking all this stuff. And I think there's certain other players in the WNBA that sort of resent her for the attention she gets, even though she's not, acquiring it by her own, I mean, by her own accolades as a great basketball player, but not really looking for it. And you see some of these other players, I think, with some of these hard fouls and comments they're making in press conference in the press where they're taking shots at her. That always bothers me, is because, like, if you know and read between the lines and learn a little bit about her, like, this is not her doing, is her basketball play and her
Hmm.
attention to detail and her working on the game. She's not necessarily looking for all the limelight. It just comes along with
Hmm.
being a great basketball player.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think some of the stuff she deals with in her own league, if you will,
Hmm.
from other, competitors that she faces night in and night out, and not just on the court, but even some of the words, in press conferences and in the media afterwards. I think it's kind of unfair to her, but she takes it in stride. She kind of turns the other cheek, and I know this is going to sound crazy, but I'm a Brooklyn kid, so Jackie Robinson was my idol
Hmm.
growing up. Even
Hmm.
though, I did, he had died a month before I was born, but I learned a lot about him, what he meant, on and off the baseball field, probably more so off it. And I almost feel like, and again, I'm not, don't, I got to preface this, I'm not comparing her like verbatim to Jackie Robinson, but you know, she's sort of in a sport not dominated, by her race, and becoming a very prevalent player. And I think there's some resentment there a little bit, and not across the board. Not going to paint with a broad brush because that's not fair either. But from some of the athletes, and
Hmm.
it just is a little reminiscent of that. Just a little
Mm.
small comparison, and she seems to like Jackie. What learning about him, she seems to like just kind of take it in stride. She doesn't fire back in the media and just talks about her game and the team and being successful, and doesn't respond, and kind of takes the high road. Do you see any of that, and your kind of thoughts on maybe I'm nuts with that comparison, but
I,
your kind of take there.
I mean, I think that there is racial bias in sport. I don't study it. I could not speak eloquently to it, but I've heard about the arguments of she gets more attention than some of the black standout players. And she's also done the one thing that's nobody has done, and that is setting that scoring record over men, over women, over everybody. And that's what, really just turned all of the national cameras onto her. So I don't want to wade into that argument because I don't
Yeah,
know I'm sure people have studied it and would be better, equipped to answer it
yeah,
than I
no,
do. But I know it's there.
uh,
There's definitely
yeah.
racial bias in sport. Sport's a
And
microcosm of society.
yeah, and
It's
again, I want to reiterate, I'm not
yeah,
calling her Jackie Rob. I'm just saying there's some similarities there
yeah,
in their perspective sports that and things they've had to deal with
yeah. I
and
mean,
make mistakes.
I think she has done remarkably well. Especially when she was in college, of how she handled
Yeah,
herself in press conferences. To We have no idea the kind of pressure she was on, and the limelight that all we see is what we see on TV, which is a fraction of her life. And I take my hat off to her of how she handled herself as a college athlete.
yeah, likewise, and well said there. So you're writing this book. Is it?
Mhm.
I gotta, is this your first foray into writing a book, or no?
It is. I did a master's thesis on it was a comparison of women's sports and newspapers, and so that's a little bit different, but had similar, uh, you know, pictorial theme because it was both pictures and also text, and so that's the closest I probably got. I did have one book offer. I turned it down because it had the wrong look and feel and presentation and how they marketed the book. And I have one shot at this, and there's a certain look I do want, and so I'm holding out for that. And it's more, it's a bit more of a coffee table type book. It's not just a picture book. It also has a fair bit of history to give it context, because like we talked about, it's so easy to look at women's sports from the lens of today than it was back then. It is so vastly different back then. And so just looking at a picture doesn't do it justice. And that's why I feel like it's important to spend a little time to give it a little context around the socioeconomic history. But it does obviously focus heavy on the cards. And so I'm still shopping it around. I'm not, I work on it. I'm still working on it, but I have enough, to do proposals and just, hopefully find the right fit.
It's funny. I've had a lot of authors on the show to, they've let me either sent me the book to read or a digital copy to read. I will say most of them, if not all of them, have been terrific. And I always ask this question because I write for Sports Collectors Digest and Sports Illustrated Collect, and those are just short columns. If some,
Mm-hmm.
but I've had people tell me with my long history in the hobby and some of the stories I have, like, you want to write a book, and like, I'm not even going to attempt it because I don't. Number one, I don't know how interesting I could make it, and I don't know if I'd be good at it. Has the whole process been kind of what you expected, more difficult, or even maybe less difficult than what you imagined? Like, going into it.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, because I read to stay informed, but reading as an activity is not something that I would gravitate towards as my first pick. And so to read about history, I would like reading about, if I had to read a chronological book about women's sport, like an encyclopedia, I probably would not do it. That's just not something interesting. But what's interesting to me is how each card opens this door to want to learn more. And so then when I start digging into their history, then I'm hooked, and then I'm interested in what they went through. And I try to convey that, in a short way, because many of these athletes have many books written about them. And so I'm not trying to rewrite history. It is a long process. If you've ever done research, you know that it's like a lot of reading and reading and reading to get one little tidbit out of it. And so it's that ferreting out of information of what fits and what I think my reader will be interested in. And hopefully it is enough to interest them to want to learn more. And that's the goal. So it's again, I'm not trying to rewrite history, but give them enough to show, like, why was this person important at that time? And why was this card important?
Yeah, it's refreshing to hear you say that, and then also, hey, this is the book I want to do. Like, I turned down that sort of offer because it went in a different direction than I'm envisioning this. Do you have sort of a timetable when people might be able to read and acquire this book, and
I mean,
do you have one in your?
it all hinges on either getting a publisher or getting a literary agent. And those are the two avenues you have to get first, or one of the two at least. Once somebody picks it up, they like to see it within a year finished.
Yeah,
And so that I can do, once I can have somebody, interested in enough. And it's another catch-22, because men understand women's sports cards, the uniqueness of them, much better than women do, because women didn't have cards growing up. They didn't get
yeah,
that magic. And again, very general terms here. And
yeah,
so, like, female feminist sport type publishers, they don't get it as much, or they don't get as excited as men that love sports cards. And so it's like
yeah,
trying to find this, somebody that's interested in it, in women's sports, and also understands how unique, novel, and rare these vintage women's cards are.
yeah, for sure. I know you said you're working on it. And these other things have to obviously fall in place for
Mm-hmm.
the book to hit the market. What percentage of the book is finished though, is in terms of, like, in your mind, like, writing it? Is it
Yeah.
75%, or where do you think you're at in that process?
most of the chapters are pretty much done. I need to go through and fine tune things like just some of the stats around the cards and shoring up the references because it is a referenced book. So that way, if it does get picked up by an academic publisher, it's legit. And, just I would say 80 to 90%, done. So, fine touches. The other thing, though, that I just realized, I worked on it for a fair bit today. There's a chapter I'm calling the Olympians. And when I started it, I loaded it with, images of cards. And since I had started it, though, I had purchased quite a few more. And so I started going through my database. I'm like, oh, I want this card. I need this card. I need that card. It's a tedious process to transfer them into the document. And so I need to do that to probably, before I ship it out again, so to speak, or propose it, I need to do that again just to make sure I'm not missing some treasure. And it is a curated book. It's not like this is all my 2,000 cards. I'm not going to do that to the reader. It's overwhelming. I don't need to show every single.
I'm sure that would be interesting. That would be interesting in its own right, too. But that's the fun part, right? Is like, hey, I can go back and give this the proper respect, or this one, that happens to everybody. Like I missed that, or that one slipped through the cracks, and now it doesn't have to because I can get it in here and shine some light on it, and so that's always a fun. It's not a mistake because it isn't published yet, right? So you can make all those fine, adjustments and fine tunings and different things, and so looking forward to that when it does come out, and I think a lot of people will be as well. I think it's it's part of hobby history. It's not female hobby history. It's part of hobby history.
Mm-hmm.
I think
absolutely.
It's like Jackie Robinson used to say, right? I'm not a black baseball player. I'm a baseball player, and these are athletes, and these are their cards. So it's part of hobby history. We don't. To me, we don't separate. I don't anyway. The hobby. The hobby's the hobby, and we have actresses and actors on cards. We have non-sports cards. We have athletes on cards. We've got pseudo celebrities now on cards. We've got tops even with their Allen and Ginter putting regular people that have done interesting things on cards. So it's the hobby, right? Just like the tagline of the show, the hobby is the people, and that encompasses all of us. So that's how I've always looked at it. But I think your book will go a long way to more people seeing that and seeing that for the way it should be. So, Cindy, I appreciate you making some time. I know you're very busy with the process of writing that book, as you say, and doing some final touches and tweaking here and there. Anything you want to share where people can follow you, what's going on, what you're doing, some of the cards you own and are acquiring, and that sort of thing. Take your time, give out whatever information you want to share there.
For the cards, I have a page called Giant Legends, and it's short for one of the working titles was Tiny Treasures, Giant Legends, and that's what these are. They're small, but they're treasures, and these are fantastic female athletes. But I call the Instagram page Giant Legends. I post a fraction of what I have because I just don't spend a lot of time on Instagram and posting things, but I appreciate the follows. I love the comments. It shows that people are genuinely interested. I have a side business called On Her Mark. So it's onhermark.com. And some of the items we made pulls from some of the imagery of the older cards. They have to be careful of, trademark violations and licensing. But I started making some things. So I'm also a woodworker, and I started using some memorabilia and items like vintage trophy toppers into
I've seen some of that, and excellent work, and just amazing and talent. I can barely knock a nail into a board, and so like I'm always when I see people do stuff like that, it's always to me even more so than anyone else. But incredible stuff for
Thank you.
sure, definitely. And I'll put this stuff too in the episode notes. So
All right.
if you missed it, go to the episode notes and it'll link up there as well.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. I really, I've always enjoyed talking about women's sports cards, and especially
Yeah,
people that
well,
really get it.
yeah, well, it's important. It's part of the whole hobby history, right? And
Yeah.
I don't want to say I'm a, people, I've heard other people call me like a hobby expert. I don't believe I'm an expert because I'm learning stuff every day, but I do appreciate the history of the hobby. I've read books and it encompasses all of the hobby, right?
Yeah.
We don't take segments and that's the hobby and that's not the hobby. It's all, if Jefferson Burdick cataloged it,
Yeah. Yeah.
everything prior to his passing, and then everything we know after. That's just a hobby. There's no two hobbies. It's trading card hobby, and that's always been my approach. And right here in Syracuse, we have Brianna Stewart could run for mayor, and she'd win. She's
Wow.
a
Popular.
local
Yeah.
legend. Yeah, and CNS High School. So and
Oh, that's
got
awesome.
to know her a little bit. So she's really a great young lady, and I still call her young lady, even though she's been playing for a bit. But so there's again, I'm a one hobby guy, and that's how it'll always be. But to to give credit where credit's due too is another thing I a peg I hang my hat on. And I think your book will go a long way into that, and not just your book, but what the stuff you're doing, even on social media, and just being, a historian in women's sports yourself. I think that goes a long way into education, right? Education
Yeah.
is very important, and that's on both sides, so it doesn't matter. So just
I've
in
learned,
general,
yeah. I'm sorry. I've
yeah,
learned so much through this process. I mean,
yeah,
you have been an amazing teacher. These little cards, and just again
yeah.
the gateway of interest that they have opened for me. And so I'm just incredibly grateful for them, because all the things that I spewed out today, most of them I would not have known if it
Yeah,
hadn't been for the research.
yep. And learning it as you like writing the book, I'm sure you
Hmm.
learned a few more things along the way as I do each day. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I always joke the minute I stop learning about something hobby, I didn't do anything that day, or I just turned my brain off, or one or the other, or both. So but there's always something to take away and learn, and every day, and the hobby changes every day too.
Hmm.
So uh, there you go.
What I can say too is, I mean, there's such great people in this hobby. I have found people that know what I do, know what I collect, and they've either sent me like a tip to some card that's up for sale somewhere, or they just send it to me. And
Yeah,
so, even though they are few and far between of people that actually know, sell, appreciate, however you want to put it, about women's cards, the fact that somebody would take the time to do that always touches me.
yeah, no doubt. It's a great community, and
Hmm.
that tend to care for everybody, look out for everybody. We hear some of the horror stories, and it's important to talk about them and just kind of let people know that
Yeah.
there are pratfalls. That it's
Yep.
not it's not always Pleasantville, but for every bad story, there's 10 good ones. I like
Oh,
to
at least.
say.
Yeah.
So
100. Yeah.
it's always nice to talk about those more, or at
Hmm.
least 10 times more
Yeah.
than the bad ones. So, Cindy, thanks. Continued success, and
Thank
again,
you.
looking forward to that book hitting the bookshelves, and people can learn about the great hobby history,
Great.
just in general. So, thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.